All right, we're going to spend the next 5 minutes figuring out something that seems kind of impossible. How did a story about a confused old guy fighting windmills become, well, maybe the most important book ever written? Let's dive in. You know the image, right? This old fella on a horse charging full speed at a windmill because he thinks it's a giant. It's famous for being kind of funny, almost ridiculous. So, how does that story get the title of most important novel ever written? It's a huge claim. The answer, you see, starts with understanding where his so-called madness really came from.
So here's the thing about Don Quixote's delusion. It's not random. It's very specific. He's this guy who has read so many fantasy books, these epic tales of knights and chivalry, that he's basically binged them until he broke his own brain. His reality and the fiction from his books, they just merged. He starts to believe all that stuff is absolutely real, and he decides, yep, I'm going to be a knight-errant too.
And that right there is the engine that drives the whole story. It's this hilarious constant crash between Quixote's wild imagination and the boring, everyday reality of 17th century Spain. He sees a fearsome giant? Nope, it's just a windmill. He sees a grand castle? Sorry, that's a rundown inn by the side of the road. And the high-born princess he swears to protect? She's actually a local peasant girl. This huge gap between what he sees and what's real is where all the comedy and, all the tragedy comes from.
Okay, so we get what he sees. But how did his mind snap in the first place? Cervantes gives us an answer that sounds surprisingly modern. It has nothing to do with magic or some ancient curse.
Yeah, you read that right. It wasn't a spell. Cervantes just straight up tells us that Quixote lost his wits from little sleep and much reading. It's basically a 400-year-old diagnosis of burnout from sleep deprivation and information overload. He literally read himself into madness. And for its time, focusing on a character's internal psychology like this, it was absolutely revolutionary.
But here's the key. Quixote's obsession wasn't with just any old books. To make his point, Cervantes was taking aim at a very specific, and I mean wildly popular type of story that everyone back then would have recognized immediately.
These books were called chivalry romances, and you gotta understand, they were the blockbuster superhero movies of their time. Seriously, they were the big-budget franchises filled with perfect, flawless knights, crazy quests, evil wizards, and damsels in distress. People were obsessed. And Cervantes saw this whole cultural phenomenon and thought, you know what? This is just begging for a parody.
And Quixote wasn't just a casual fan. He was deep in the fandom. He wasn't just reading these stories, he was living in them, getting into these intense arguments about which fictional knight was the greatest of all time, as if they were real historical figures. It's like arguing today about who'd win in a fight, Batman or Iron Man, except you are 100% convinced that they both actually exist. That was Don Quixote.
But the book is so much more than just a really clever parody. The reason it's lasted for centuries is that at its core, it's about a relationship. It's the story of one of the greatest and probably the unlikeliest partnerships in all of literature.
And this is where Sancho Panza comes in. He's Quixote's squire, and he is his total opposite in every way imaginable. Quixote is the ultimate idealist. His head is in the clouds looking for glory. Sancho, he's a realist. His feet are planted firmly on the ground, and he's usually just looking for his next meal. Quixote talks in these flowery speeches he got from his books. Sancho just speaks in an endless stream of proverbs. This whole dynamic, the dreamer and the realist, that's the real heart of the novel.
Sancho's worldview is just simple. While his master is off chasing these grand, abstract ideas of honor and chivalry, Sancho's tagging along for a very simple, very concrete reason. He's been promised that if he's a good squire, he'll be made the governor of an island. For him, that's a good enough deal. His practical, down-to-earth nature is the perfect anchor for Quixote's wild flights of fancy.
So we've got the parody, we've got the all-time great odd couple. But the one thing that truly rockets Don Quixote into masterpiece territory is something that happened after the book came out. And trust me, this is where the story gets really wild.
Okay, so Cervantes publishes part 1 of his book in 1605, and it's a smash hit. I mean, an instant bestseller. But while he's taking his time writing the official sequel, some anonymous author rushes out a fake, totally unauthorized part 2. This act of, literary piracy forced Cervantes to do something that no writer had ever really done before.
Okay, check this out, because this is brilliant. So the fake sequel comes out. In response, Cervantes writes his own official Part 2. But here's the incredible twist. In his version, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza are now famous. They're celebrities. And why are they famous? Because they've read the first book about themselves. They even run into people on the road who've read the fake sequel, and they all have a good laugh about how terrible it is. The story literally breaks the fourth wall and folds in on itself. It's totally meta.
And you have to understand, this wasn't just business. It was deeply personal. The author of the fake book wrote a preface that was just a nasty, vicious attack on Cervantes himself. He mocked him for being old, for being poor, and even for an injury that cost him the use of his hand in battle. So when Cervantes wrote Part 2, he wasn't just taking his story back, he was defending his own honor.
So when you put all of that together, the deep psychology, the sharp parody, and this completely mind-bending meta-story, you end up with something totally new. You're basically looking at the birth of the modern novel.
I mean, with this one book, Cervantes basically wrote the rule book for what a novel could be. He gave us characters who felt real on the inside, with complex motivations. He mixed laugh-out-loud comedy with real pathos and tragedy. He made the story about storytelling itself. He showed us that reality is all about your point of view. And of course, he gave us that classic duo, the dreamer and the realist, a formula you still see everywhere today.
And a huge part of that is his style of humor. Cervantes is the absolute master of the straight face. He never winks it to you, he never nudges you to say, hey, this is the funny part. He just describes the most insane, absurd situations with this very serious, matter-of-fact tone. And somehow, that's what makes it so hilarious. It's a deadpan style that has influenced comedy for hundreds of years.
And that, right there, is the book's ultimate genius. It starts out feeling like a joke, a parody, but it leaves you wrestling with this incredibly deep question. Is it better to be the sane realist who just accepts the world for what it is, or is there a kind of noble beauty in Quixote's madness, in his impossible, ridiculous quest to see the world not as it is, but as it ought to be? That question? That's why, 400 years later, we're still talking about the man who fought the windmills.